Evio.
Welcome back to The Devil Within. When we left off, the woods of Dover, Massachusetts had already made their opinion known. Whatever walked there on the night of April 21st, 1977, wasn't finished. First came Bill Bartlett on Farm Street, headlights carving through darkness until they revealed a pale, hairless creature perched on a stone wall like a half-formed idea. Then came John Baxter on Miller Hill Road, a figure approaching in the dark, gait all wrong, posture all wrong, proportions all wrong, slipping into a ravine like it had been born there. 2 sightings, 90 minutes apart, both describing the same impossible thing. 2 boys, 2 roads, 1 straight line through the woods. Tonight we pick up the 3rd encounter, the one that should have closed the book on the Dover demon, if Dover were the kind of town that admits its own ghost. This is Chapter 4, The Girl on the Bridge. First, a little atmosphere. Robert Frost once wrote, "The woods are lovely, dark, and deep." He meant it as a lullaby of sorts, a quiet surrender to nature in isolation. But anyone who's ever driven a country road at midnight knows the truth. The woods aren't exactly lovely. Not at night. And not when you're 15 years old, sitting in the passenger seat of a car, idling near a narrow bridge, and the darkness is so thick that it seems to move. That was the situation for Abby Brabham on the early morning of April 22nd, less than 24 hours after Bartlett's and Baxter's encounters. She and her boyfriend, Will Tainer, were driving near the intersection of Springdale Avenue and Farm Street, on the south end of the same eerie 2-mile line. The windows were cracked, the night was mild, the engine hummed beneath them like a steady mechanical heartbeat. And then she saw it. Not crossing the road, not lurking in the woods, but perched on the guardrail, like it was waiting. A shape, a presence, a creature that should not have existed in the same reality as a Ford sedan. At first, Abby thought it was a child, a small figure hunched on the metal rail, knees drawn up, arms tight against its body. But the longer she stared, the less human it became. The head was the first betrayal. Too large, too smooth, too hairless, like a massive egg balanced on a stick. The limbs were long, thin, fragile looking. And then the eyes ruined any chance at rationality. They were green, not reflective like a cat's, not glowing like an animal caught in the headlights. No, they were lit seemingly from within, like 2 lanterns buried in a skull. She gasped. Will didn't, because Will hadn't seen a thing. "What?" he asked. She couldn't find the word. Monster sounded melodramatic, creature felt too clinical, demon was too theological. She settled for the only honest option. "There's something sitting on the guardrail." He looked, he shrugged. He told her she was imagining it. Teenagers are really cruel sometimes, but teenage boys are especially gifted at dismissing anything that doesn't fit neatly into the world as they expect it to be. But Abby wasn't imagining it. She leaned forward as the car crept past, just inches from the thing's perch. And in the 3 seconds she had, 3 seconds that would ambush her dreams for years afterward, she got as good a view as anyone ever has of the Dover demon. The skin, smooth, pale, and hairless. The body, hunched and bony. The posture, as if startled, tense, ready to spring. And the eyes, large, green, luminous, steady. Later, she would describe the creature in almost the exact same language Bartlett used. The size, the shape of the head, the thin limbs, the unnatural stillness. The sense that it was watching, not reacting, not frightened, not confused, just watching. The way a human might watch ants on a sidewalk. Will laughed it off, but Abby didn't. The next morning, she told a friend who told another friend who, like all good amateurs in supernatural drama, immediately told the one adult in town who wouldn't dismiss the whole thing as teenage hysteria. Loren Coleman, the cryptozoologist who had already been interviewing Bartlett and Baxter. Coleman listened carefully. Abby didn't know the other witnesses. She didn't know about Bartlett's sketch. She didn't know about Baxter's encounter. The stories hadn't hit newspapers yet. Nothing had leaked, yet she described the exact same creature. And crucial detail, her sighting completed the line. If you draw a map of Dover and you plot the three encounters, it forms a nearly perfect north to south corridor through town. Farm Street to Miller Hill Road to Springdale Avenue, a downward drift, a migration. Not random, not scattered, a path, as if something was traveling through Dover, like it had somewhere to go. But none of this was known to Abby when she gave her description. She only knew that what she'd seen wasn't human. Not animal, not anything she'd been warned about by adults who preferred their monsters to appear in books or slasher films. Not on quiet suburban roads. The most unsettling part of her story wasn't the creature itself. It was the duration. Bartlett saw it for seconds. Baxter glimpsed it in a ravine. But Abby watched it as her boyfriend drove past. The car rolling at just the right speed, the angle just right, the lighting just wrong. She had a nearly clean profile view, more than anyone else, and it didn't blink. Not once. Just turned its head slightly as the car passed, like it was tracking her. 3 sightings in 25 hours, all by teenagers, all along the same invisible seam running through the woods. Small towns build myths out of far less. But Dover didn't build a myth. Dover buried this one. Maybe because the kids were reliable. Maybe because the adults were scared. Maybe because the creature, whatever it was, never came back. There were no footprints, no hair samples, no body found in a ditch. Just 3 nights worth of terror preserved in pencil, in memory, and in whispers. But before we leave Abby on that bridge, illuminated by the faint green gleam of a creature's impossible eyes, there's one last piece to place the mood exactly where it belongs. Emily Dickinson again, the queen of quiet horror. She wrote, "The body borrows a trouble it cannot contain." That was Abby, a 15-year-old with a burden too strange for her age, too eerie for her town, too heavy for an April night that should have ended with nothing more supernatural than a curfew. But this is the devil within, and stories like this never let anyone off that easily. Stick around. We're about to follow the investigators, the interviews, the map, the theories, and the supernatural fissures at the heart of Dover's geography. For now, we leave Abby watching the green-eyed creature slip back into the dark, carrying whatever secret it brought with it through the woods. Chapter 5. What Walks Between the Trees. The old poets understood something that we tend to forget. The woods have rules of their own. Robert Frost hinted at it when he wrote about the sweep of easy wind and downy flake in one poem, and promises to keep in another. The sense that the forest is beautiful only if you don't look too closely, only if you don't linger long enough to see what moves between the trunks when the world thinks you're asleep. And Emily Dickinson, who rarely left her Amherst home and yet somehow understood dread at a cellular level. She once wrote, "The forest of the night is but the shade of God, where creatures walk who have no right to touch the human sod." No one in Dover, Massachusetts quoted Dickinson in 1977 about the demon case, but they didn't need to. They felt the same instinctive unease, the bodily recognition that something had passed through town that wasn't meant for human eyes. By now, we've followed the Dover Demons' 25-hour pilgrimage through 3 sightings. Bill Bartlett on Farm Street, John Baxter on Miller Hill Road, Abby Brabham on the Springdale Avenue Bridge. 3 points forming a perfect, unnatural corridor, one that looked less like chance and more like intention. Something was moving. Something was passing through Dover the way a migrating animal moves through a forest. Invisible, until the moment it isn't. Tonight, we step back from the eyewitnesses and into the investigation that followed. The interviews, the theories, the cryptozoologist who arrived with a notebook full of questions, and the strange, disquieting fact that every scientific explanation fell apart the moment someone tried to apply it. Because what the witnesses described didn't behave like an animal. It behaved like a visitor. The man who pulled the threads together was Loren Coleman, one of the earliest and still one of the most respected cryptozoologists in the country. Coleman came to Dover within days of the sightings, traveling from Boston with a folder of case forms and a kind of clinical excitement that only a researcher of the strange can appreciate. Coleman interviewed Bartlett first, then Baxter, then Brabham. He interviewed their parents, their teachers, their friends. He checked for hoaxes, crosstalk, shared influences, pranks, anything that would suggest teenagers doing teenager things. But they weren't lying. Coleman would later say that Bartlett in particular seemed haunted, not frightened or hysterical, but burdened by the knowledge that he had seen something without context, something without precedent or language. Cryptid witnesses often embellish details over time, but Bartlett didn't do that. His story stayed the same for 50 years, the same words, the same shape, the same eyes. Baxter also, consistent, and Abby, calm, grounded, uninterested in attention, described the same being even though she hadn't heard a single detail about the other sightings. That's when Coleman coined the name, the Dover Demon. Not because it resembled folklore, not because it matched any demonic archetype, but because no creature had ever been documented that looked even remotely like it. This wasn't a Bigfoot variant or a misidentified bear. It wasn't a fox. It wasn't an owl or a raccoon with mange. It wasn't a deer or a dog or a primate escaped from a lab. This was something else. And here's where the strange beauty of the case emerges. The less evidence Coleman found, the more the story resisted explanation. So let's take the creature apart anatomically. Gently, of course, because even hypothetical autopsies can count as violence in this business. Okay, 1, the oversized head. Smooth, hairless, egg-shaped. In any known mammal, that head would be too heavy for the neck, as described. The center of gravity would collapse, and the musculature just wouldn't work. Let's move on to the eyes. Large, luminous, glowing, by witness description. Nocturnal reflectivity, it's called tapetum lucidum, tends to produce yellow, green, or white glints, but Bartlett saw orange. Now, Abby saw green from the creature's own luminescence, not reflected light. Animals don't do that. The limbs, long, thin, and delicate. The arms reached nearly to the knees. The fingers, if you can call them that, were almost root-like, curling around stone. No mammal in Massachusetts matches those proportions. None. 0. The gait. Baxter described a movement pattern that didn't seem to be bipedal, but it wasn't quadrupedal either. It was something in between, something fluid, something designed for crouching or for perching, maybe for clinging. The skin, hairless, peach-toned, smooth. This rules out deer, it rules out canines and foxes, raccoons, felines, coyotes, every other woodland animal narrative to New England. If the Dover Demon were biological, it would have been sick or deformed or dying. And yet, all 3 witnesses described it as alert, as intentional, and as whole. Whatever it wasn't struggling. It was just wrong. Coleman noticed something else, something subtle, something the newspapers never printed. All 3 sightings happened near stone walls. Old stone walls, colonial walls. Walls that predated almost every house in Dover. New England is filled with them. Miles upon miles of moss-covered barriers built by settlers in the 16 and 1700s. Most people think of them as quaint, picturesque reminders of a pastoral past. But there's another way to see them. They're scars, lines of stone pressed into land that once belonged to the Wampanoag and the Massachusetts peoples. Land considered sacred, liminal, alive. Walls that cut through old paths, old hunting routes, ceremonial grounds. Coleman wondered quietly whether the Dover demon was following something older than the roads, something beneath them, something around them. A ley line, maybe, or a migration path for something not quite animal, or an interdimensional seam. The sort described in folklore from Ireland to Japan, where beings slip through on certain nights in certain places when the geography briefly permits it. But he stopped short of publishing that. Come on, cryptozoologists get enough ridicule as it is. The skeptics tried. God bless them, they tried. A baby moose. Except moose calves have long snouts and dark fur, and none existed in Dover at the time. A foal. But horses don't sit on stone walls like freaking gargoyles. A hairless dog. Except no one has ever seen a dog with a perfectly smooth, oversized head and eyes like luminous marbles. A prank. But why would three kids who didn't know each other independently describe the same anatomically impossible creature within the same 25-hour window? Mass hysteria. Now that's the skeptic's favorite, but hysteria requires shared exposure. These kids didn't share anything except a town boundary and a bad night. And so slowly, reluctantly, the investigators arrived at the answer no one wanted. There was no explanation. Not one that fit the rules. Not one that fit the world. Which leads to the question that has kept this case simmering in the background of American folklore for nearly 50 years. If the Dover demon wasn't an animal, wasn't a hoax, wasn't a hallucination, then what exactly walked through those woods? We return to Emily Dickinson. The possible slow fuse is lit by the imagination. Most people read that as encouragement, but tonight we read it as a warning, because imagination didn't create the Dover demon. It only filled the silence after it passed. The fuse was already lit. The creature had already walked the 2-mile line, and Dover, in its unwillingness to speak of the thing, became the perfect kindling for a legend that no one wanted. A legend that, like Robert Frost said, stretches away unto the edge of doom. Chapter 6, The Thing That Left No Footprints. Before we begin the final chapter, a last line of poetry to darken the edges a little bit, the kind that feels like a whisper carried in from the tree line. Robert Frost once wrote, "We dance around in a ring and suppose, but the secret sits in the middle and knows." The Dover demon was that secret, silent, unmoving, uncooperative, aware in a way that defied the biological script, something at the center of a ring no one realized had been drawn. This is the end of the line, literally and figuratively, the final mile of the strange corridor traced through Dover, Massachusetts on those 2 April nights in 1977. We followed the demon from Bartlett's Headlights to Baxter's Ravine to Abby's Bridge, each sighting forming a piece of geometry that really shouldn't exist. A path, a migration, a transit from nowhere to nowhere, but unmistakably moving through the world of the living. So now we pull together everything that came after. The aftermath, the theories, the long silence, and the thing that never happened again. The most haunting part of the Dover demon story is not what the creature did. It's what it didn't do. It never returned. No footprints were found the following morning, despite the soft earth near the ravine, the muddy edges by the bridge, the gravel shoulder where Bartlett saw it perched. No animal reports, no twisted vegetation, no strange carcasses, no new sightings. Nothing tracked, nothing trapped, nothing recovered. In the days that followed, reporters descended on Dover to pry open a story the town wanted to keep shut. Teachers were interviewed, Students were questioned in the hallways. Parents whispered across fences. And through it all, the three teenagers stuck to their stories with a steadiness that unnerved even the adults advocating for skepticism. Coleman plotted the sightings onto a map, and the line appeared. So clean, so deliberate, it looked like a surveyor's mark. Farm Street to Miller Hill Road to Springdale Avenue. A straight, steady, southbound drift. One reporter asked Bartlett whether he thought the demon was dangerous. Bartlett just said, "I don't think it cared about us one way or another." And that is somehow even worse than an actual threat. Because the thing that wants to hurt you first has to acknowledge your existence. A thing that moves through your world without noticing you at all. That's a universe casting a shadow that you weren't meant to see. Cryptid lore is filled with theories, half superstition and half desperation. And the Dover demon invited all of them. The first, the alien hypothesis. Not the Hollywood variety. No saucers or little gray men, no probing beams or tools, but something older and stranger. A scout, maybe, a stray, a traveler between dimensions instead of planets. The orange eyes described by Bartlett resembled a kind of low-level luminescence seen in deep ocean creatures. The elongated limbs were almost cephalopodic. The movement pattern closer to something that had evolved underground or under pressure or under circumstances that humans don't understand. But again, no landing craft, no burned earth, no trace. A visitor who left no footprints is not particularly satisfying to the UFO crowd. Theory 2, the native liminal being hypothesis. New England's original nations, the Wampanoag and the Massachusetts, had rich traditions about spirits inhabiting the forests, marshes, and stone boundaries. Creatures that were neither gods nor animals. Guardians of paths, watchers of thresholds. Some elders interviewed decades later noted that the creature's appearance, pale, thin, long-limbed with luminous eyes, resembled a type of, quote, shadow watcher spirit described in oral histories. These beings, they said, were not here for humans. They simply passed through. Now, if that's true, Dover didn't experience a haunting. It experienced a trespass. Theory 3, the interdimensional slip hypothesis. If you draw a map of historical odd zones in Massachusetts, Bridgewater Triangle to the south, the old colonial graveyards to the north, the electromagnetic anomalies through the Blue Hills, Dover sits directly on one of the thinner seams. So if something pushed through that seam, just long enough to cross a 2-mile line, that might be all the biology we're ever meant to see. No agenda, no message, no malice, just migration. Theory 4, the hoax hypothesis. The least compelling explanation of all. 3 teenagers, separately, without knowing each other's stories, within one day, describing the exact same creature? Impossible. Even skeptics quietly acknowledge that. So after the media attention died down, Dover went still. No new sightings, no recurrence, no slow evolution into the trickster folk legend. Instead, something stranger happened. The town never absorbed the demon into its identity. Other towns do. Point Pleasant has the Mothman statue. Roswell has a museum. Salem has made an entire economy out of its ghosts. But Dover, with its iron wealth and polished old New England sensibility, chose to let the demon sink into the soil. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of embarrassment, maybe because the thing walked a line they still don't want to look at. Years later, Bartlett still avoided interviews. Baxter rarely spoke of it, and Abby refused to sensationalize her sighting. These weren't attention seekers. These weren't fabulists. These were 3 young people who saw something that slipped between worlds, left them with a memory instead of explanation, and returned the woods to silence. From Emily Dickinson, the unknown is the wildest idea of all. And she wasn't wrong. The Dover demon didn't harm anyone. It didn't stalk, it didn't steal, it didn't leave claw marks or broken branches or footprints in the thawing mud. It just walked, quietly, solemnly, precisely, through a town asleep at the wheel, along a route older than roads, older than fences, older than the idea of New England itself. Most monsters chase us. This one just passed us by. Sometimes the things we fear the most aren't hunting us at all. Sometimes we're just witnesses to the drift of something far older, something that moves through the corner of the map we were never meant to see. And maybe that's the real terror of the Dover demon. It didn't come from us. It didn't come for us. It just passed through. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget, subscribe to The Devil Within wherever you listen to podcasts. Rate and review. It helps more people find these stories buried in the dark. Share the episode with a friend who loves the weird or the supernatural and the unexplained. Follow us on Instagram at The Devil Within Pod for behind-the-scenes content, photos, and upcoming series announcements. And email us at eviocreative.com with your theories, sightings, or stories from your own hometown's dark corners. And hit follow on the Evio Creative YouTube page for all of our shows, The Ides of April, Criminal Mischief, Taboo Treasures, and more. And don't forget to check this episode's show notes for great deals from the great companies that still support long-form storytelling. Mood, legal THC and CBD gummies shipped nationwide. Go to mood.com/devilwithin for 20% off your first order. QUINCE, luxury basics without the luxury markup. Go to quince.com/devilwithin for 365-day returns and free shipping. Mint Mobile, premier wireless for $15 a month. Go to mintmobile.com/devilwithin. And ExpressVPN, protect your data anywhere. Go to expressvpn.com for up to 4 months free. The Devil Within is an Evio production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm your writer and host, Brandon Morgan.